Bonnie Boyd, thank you so much for being on Flute Unscripted.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Joseph Mariano. I know he was a huge influence on you and a really big mentor in your life. So can you share a little bit more about him and maybe the inspiration that you want to pass down to other people through the positions that you took over from him? So that's at Eastman and Rochester.
So he was a massive artist, and his value system of artistry and of music making are probably the most important to me as an artist, truly. He was raised in a home which apparently was always playing Italian opera. And so this vocal approach to very natural approach to line, to nuance, to the freedom in the music, and was really kind of epitomized his playing. He had more variety in his playing than I've ever yet still heard in an artist. It was, he could at one moment sound the almost rough and startling, shocking, and then the next moment it would be like something out of heaven. It was just massive changes, and I think he was so creative and so unleashed that it was truly an experience. And the sound was, you could just fill a stadium, you know. It was breadth. So it took a while sometimes to understand from him the difference between volume and breadth. You know, he would say, no, you don't need to be that loud, you're too loud. He thought everyone was too loud. He would say that, and then he would demonstrate for you, and to me it sounded louder. And then it would, you know, I didn't really understand. I didn't say anything, of course, but then I eventually realized, no, it's actually breadth. It's like his sound is all around him. And it would be in back of him too. It was an extraordinary thing. So he demanded that from me. He did not want, he wasn't really interested in my technique. And because I had Roger Stevens, who had done such a, I mean, I just owe him everything I can do on the flute. He had made sure that my technique was completely ready and so on, and sound, everything. He was just an incredible teacher. And he said, you know, when he sent me back to Eastman, he said, you're not going to be, and when you graduate from there, you won't play the flute any better than you play today. But when you graduate, you will be a much better musician than you are now. And that was completely and utterly right. So
yeah, like he set you up with the foundation to then, you know, explore yourself as a musician with Mariano.
Right, that's absolutely right. So Mariano would only really listen to Bach and Brahms and Daphnis and Debussy, and that's all he wanted to hear from me. He would never even listen to Chantalinos or something. So you can do that yourself. You go do that yourself. So he didn't even weigh in on those. And in the first day that, you know, I brought him an etude, he said, that's the last etude I ever want to hear you play. And that was, he wouldn't hear anything else. So that was the end of that. It was a good thing Stevens had prepared all of that.
No kidding.
So yeah. I was at the right time with the right person, and took a very long time to understand that how my own personality and what I wanted to say would merge with the composer. And that was really a very long process and kind of painful. And then to understand what Mariano was talking about when he talks about simplicity and line, those kind of things, that make sense to me, because I thought that everything should be extremely passionate. I was very immature. So I would just play everything the way I wanted to play it. So everything sounded the same, but I thought it was all very exciting. But it took a long time to understand that there are more kinds of emotion than that.
Yeah, actually, I think I found a quote of yours somewhere where you say, you know, like true artistry is that moment where you as the musician meet, you know, the composer, and your two ideas kind of meld, and you finally understand what the composer is trying to do, and so then you're delivering that message. So I think that kind of hits it right on the head.
Right. We have to be true to the composer, and yet everybody does not play it the same, and it's still
Right,
valid.
right.
So there's a mysterious meeting of who we are as an artist and the way we hear it and that composer. And eventually that becomes, I think, subconscious. And that's the reason we do things like music history and theory and all of those other subjects is to become familiar, truly familiar, to meet the composer, as you say, to meet the music and to understand it, and it becomes all internalized in a way. So it's not so necessarily conscious, and then you have a freedom within that when you've established the parameters of that composer. There's a great freedom within that, and you can truly unleash yourself and not violate the style at last. So that's a very long process. That's not easy, but that's what we're doing in advanced artistry.
I wanted to find out a little bit more about maybe the pressures of your job at age 21, which is so young. You were named principal flute in the Rochester Philharmonic. Can you talk a little bit about what that audition experience was like, and maybe the tremendous amount of responsibility that was placed on you at that time as well?
Gee, I've never been asked that before. That's fun. So the way it had begun is there was an audition for Rochester is set up in an unusual way. There are only two people in each wind and brass section. Well, brass is a little different, but wind in general, who are paid full time. And then they hire the third person on a per service basis. And they've been able to do that historically because of the wealth of professional musicians here, so that had really been a student position for a kind of a long time. People, Kajala played in that position and he had a history. So I believe that I was not supposed to get that. But I decided I wanted to audition at the beginning of my sophomore year. And I really don't think it was planned. And somehow something must have, gone wrong. Right for me, but wrong.
Right.
And I ended up playing in that position. So I had been in the orchestra for 3 years, second flute, and then the first flutist was ill. The last, off and on, like the last year or so, over, especially the last few months, and she would cancel at the very, very last second, like literally at midnight before the first rehearsal. And of course, they would call the full-time second player. And if it was something like Symphonic Metamorphosis, she would say, absolutely not on your life. I'm not playing that tomorrow morning. Call Bonnie. And I guess I was young and foolish, but I said, okay, sure. So I stepped in on a number of things like that. So maybe that helped a little bit. And then she, the lady who was ill, did leave in that May or June, and I took the audition for Philharmonic and won the first flute job in Lyon. Actually, we were hired together, so Leon Bicey was hired as a full-time second. And
Yeah,
then
what a
the other
section.
lady, yeah, it was really fun. The other lady who was had been in second moved. Her husband got a position elsewhere, so both jobs were open. They hired both of us in the same audition. And meanwhile, I had been down to Dallas to take the audition for principal and was offered that. So neither orchestra had a contract for the next fall. So I just had letters of intent from two orchestras and no position. So I went home to Los Angeles and Long Beach with my parents and went to the beach and waited to see which orchestra was going to settle first. And so the way it worked out was that Rochester settled at midnight before the first day of the first rehearsal. Contractually, Dallas didn't actually settle that year until December. They ended up locked out and didn't begin until like after the first of the year. So that's why I stayed in Rochester. I mean, it just, once again, a decision that wasn't
Funny how that works out. Yeah.
yeah, just the way it worked out. And Rochester Philharmonic was searching for a music director. So we had, guest conductor after guest conductor, and then finally David Zinman was hired. And so I had 10 years under him as music director, and I would trade those 10 years for anything. I learned an immense amount about being a musician, I learned how to play in time, and still get my point across artistically. Be up to that point, as long as I had enough rubato and I could make a big enough retard, I
Yeah,
could do something I
course,
thought was
yeah.
expressive. But to do that without taking extra time, and he wanted to do exactly with his baton. He was one of these that had to be on his beat, not a little after. So I had to train the whole orchestra to do that. And he knew before I had even played a note if it was going to be late. And he was right. He was like, you get this dirty look. So it was absolutely he's one of the greats, as far as I am concerned, one of the great conductors of all time and American. So that was my real experience in the orchestra. I learned a tremendous amount. I'm really glad for the time. And I left when I was just gone too much to do the solo work.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't fair anymore.
I mean,
So
your playing though in the Philharmonic has been described as very, I mean, by your peers as very spontaneous, not really playing something the same way twice. So how did you achieve that? Well, it sounds like trying to always be with the conductor and always together, and like you said, not much room for leeway.
I think I learned, that's a great question. I think I learned to do it with nuance,
Mm.
to make my point with nuance, to make my point with the shape of the phrase, the way the phrase, spin a phrase, things like that. I had to learn to do that. It's a little bit like what Rostropovich demonstrated, which that Bach was still one of the most profound performances I've ever heard. And I think you could have set a metronome to it. It was so flawlessly flowing in it. So the structure of what he did was completely undisturbed. And then so the structure hangs together, and then you have all this freedom within it. It's the ultimate, really, it's the ultimate artistry. And so I think that's that's one of the great things that I learned from playing those years with David Zinman.
And you always knew that you wanted a solo career. That was something that you felt like was always pulling you. And then you finally felt like it was the right decision, the right move in 1984. So what was that experience like? Was that kind of thrilling to make that big change?
It wasn't a snap decision. I
Yeah.
thought about it a lot. And what I finally came to, it's a big question mark. You don't know how it's going to work out. I had some indication that it would go. I mean, I certainly wasn't, I think I'd love to do this. I wonder if it'll work. It wasn't that bad, but people had said you can do this, and you have a certain amount of input that you can hold the stage, that kind of thing. There are different personalities. It's not a question of quality. I don't think if somebody's a soloist or an orchestral player, it's not a quality thing. It's a personality thing. Some people adore to be in the orchestra the most, and some people really love to be standing up and playing the concerto or a solo recital. And as you just said, you really know a lot about me. That's right. I really did. I always wanted to do that. Maybe it came from the piano, all those years with piano, I don't know, but it was something that was really in my heart. And when I first talked to Mariano about it, I said, I really don't want to be an orchestra. I said to him, can you imagine? I really want to be a soloist. And remember, this was before even Ron Paul really
Right.
had entered the stage. So he was playing, but it was mostly in smaller concerts, and it really wasn't well known in the United States. And so there really wasn't any sort of precedent. And I said, no, I want to be a soloist. And he said, oh, well, you'll play solos, if you get your job in the orchestra, he said, and then you can play a concerto every few years. And I said, well, I don't want to play every few years. I want to play all the time. And he said, no, just get your job in the orchestra. So I did, but this burning didn't leave. And then finally the decision was kind of like this. I've shared this with students a great deal, is I decided, I felt that I would rather in a few years say, well, I tried, I left, and it was reason, I got some good playing. And it was a decision that, but I did what was in my heart, and I gave it a shot. I found that I'd rather be saying that than in 10 years than saying, I can see I should have tried this, and I'm so sorry I did. Now it's too
Yeah.
late.
Yeah.
And I just preferred to go the first way.
Was there
So
like any particular concert or performance where you kind of pinched yourself and thought, you know, this is it, this is what I was hoping for this whole time. I feel like I finally have made my dream come true.
I don't think so. Actually, no, I don't think so. I can't point to anything. I think it just I talked to a lot of people about, I think the biggest concern was how do you start? You know,
Yeah.
how do you get this thing started? And when I would speak with people, Janda Gattani, the great mezzo, we recorded, commissioned and recorded the Benson songs together and did quite a lot. She sang on both of my tele concerts, actually. Marvelous woman and marvelous artist. It was really nice of her to sing with me. I would ask these kind of people, well, how do you get a solo career? How do you get this started? And they would say, well, you just play the very best you can. Each opportunity you get, you play the very best you can, and somebody will ask you to do something else. And that was not what I was looking for. I
Right.
was like, that's not what I wanted to know. I wanted some magic answer. And I kept getting that answer. And that's true. That's really true. And then she said, you need to record. She said if there was one single thing that it helped her get on the map, it was recording. So I started out with that too, and started out recording, and it did. I don't know if it still is very good. But it began to get your playing out, because radio stations would use it, especially something a little shorter. If they have 3 minutes left after a program, they might stick your recording on. And I think that was helpful too. And then eventually management was helpful sometimes, not always. So, yeah, so that's really the way it started. And plus of course I kept the Eastman job. So
Yeah.
all those 10 years or 12, I was doing both jobs, which were both full-time jobs. So I didn't have any family. I just had, I was married with my marvelous husband, and we just both worked. And he was very interested in everything I was doing, came and was extremely supportive. And that was another thing that helped with the solo careers. He said, I want you to go for it. This is what you want to do. And I'd been feeling kind of down. Like I would really like to play recitals again. I would like to play this way again. I've been in the orchestra for a number of years. And he said, you're playing recital. And he went down and he rented some place for me to play. And we got a pianist, and he called the critic and said, you should come and review her concert. It was hilarious when I look back on it. But he was very helpful. And it really did kind of pull me out of the blues. It
Yeah.
was very, and so maybe that was a little bit of a turning point. It was just there was a future in the way that for me, that was something that was in my heart. So I kept going with Eastman, and I still have. So that's the way, and that combines better with being
Yeah.
out of town, right?
And did any of that change, a soloist life when you decided to have a family?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Change is
Uh,
an understatement. Yeah.
actually, the arrival of our first son was close to the time. It was right after I left the orchestra, but it had nothing to do with it. So I wasn't expecting. When I left the orchestra, it was a completely separate decision. And then the following year, then we were expecting it. We'd been married a long time, 10 years, almost 11. So no one was expecting us to have any children. And, after a certain amount of time, people stop asking you,
Right.
nobody asks anymore, nobody says anything. And so when we turned up we were going to have a baby, people were just astonished beyond. And then we continued another one and another one.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating, just how multifaceted your career is, and how you are as a person. Something else that was so funny to read about was that you were actually featured in Vogue's Pattern magazine. At one point, they did an article on you because you had used a pattern from that magazine to make some solo dresses out of some recital dresses. I know you probably did that out of necessity. You can't, is it a faux pas to wear a recital gown to 2 recitals? I feel like it's one and then done.
Oh, that's hilarious. It depends on where it is. So
Yeah.
that's a funny question, because something happened once like that. I made all my gowns. So I have many performance gowns that I made, including my costume for the Corigliano, for the Pied Piper, made a costume with the big cape and everything. but in fact, I I did a festival in Victoria. It's defunct now. It's a very outstanding festival. For quite a number of years, went there in the summer, and every year he played a concerto with the Victoria Symphony. The man who ran that festival also had the Victoria Symphony involved, so people played concertos. And apparently I brought the same dress. It had been several years. I didn't even think about it. And then there were some people sitting in the audience overhearing people behind her. And they go, "Oh, I remember when she wore that dress for the Nielsen Awards." I was like, "Oh no."
What are the odds? Yeah.
Isn't that so funny?
Yeah. I want to shift a little bit to your teaching style. And I found this wonderful quote from Mindy Kaufman, just talking about you as a teacher and just being so extremely supportive of her and making her feel like she had all the confidence to do what she needed to do to ultimately win her job with the New York Phil. And that was really kind of your secret, was giving students the tools they needed to feel encouraged and confident. So do you think that you can talk a little bit more about how you gravitated towards that theme for your teaching? Do you see that as something that, like a gift that you give your students?
That's really nice of you to say. Yes, I mean, I feel that way as a even personally
Yeah.
with people, with anyone. So I just feel that when you are when people let you know what your strengths are, and what you do that's special, and what you do that's really noteworthy and is moving to other people, that's incredibly important to know. It's as important or more important than knowing what your weak spots are. And then with that, kind of with like, who are you as an artist? So that's always the focus of my teaching, is who are you, what do you have to say, and then everything we do is about the tools for that, to develop the tools so that you have the vehicle to be who you are, and to really impart to the audience what you want to impart. So part of that, I feel, is it's in absolutely, um, you can't untwine them, confidence and that. So where your confidence is founded, and there's no substitute for doing the work when it comes to confidence. If you really didn't do the work, then you're thinking you didn't practice enough. That's
Right.
going through your mind when you're playing. So does work, right? We've all done that. So I've got to know that I did the work, and I put the time in, and I really have mastered this. And then it's about what I have to bring. So if I can focus on who I am, and what I would like to say, to the audience, what I have to bring to the audience, the range of what I've experienced, and the range of love and joy and sorrow, all the things that you bring to the stage. That if it's about that, so it's what you're giving there. And if, to the extent that I can get away from what I have to prove there, that if I have to prove myself and prove that I'm worthy, I think that's the most vulnerable position to be in. That's not what I would like to be doing.
That's
So
interesting that you say that that part is vulnerable, because it feels like it's also very vulnerable to kind of let your guard down and just, use your voice and let all of the other stuff go away. So how do you have any tools, any advice for people on how to kind of let your guard down and just be you on stage?
yes, absolutely. So first of all, it's not instant. It takes time. And I remember specifically playing a recital and playing one phrase the way I wanted to, really wanted to, where I felt I was completely and utterly myself in that phrase. And that had taken a long time to come to that, where I dared to do that. So performing more is definitely helpful. The more times you go out there and kind of bare your soul, and dare to really play what you meant to play. It was only one phrase, and then it became more where it would be almost the whole concert, where I could completely be myself, maybe with the exception of the very beginning when everybody's a little more nervous, but where you could just dare. so certainly the more you perform, the better. So in my teaching, people play recitals, a lot of recitals. We don't wait and just play one senior recital ever. We play many of my students play like three solo recitals a year, certainly two, and always two. And I'm less concerned about how perfect that recital was as that they get up and play. It's got to be good. It can't be terrible. That's
Right.
insulting. But we get it together, and we do repertoire that's important, that's going to help people grow and go out and play. And I think each time you do that, we and I end up talking to them about what they're going to focus on when they go out there, and what they want to bring, what beauty they want to bring to the audience, and so on. And they're giving a gift to the audience, they're giving themselves. So I think that's a very big part. And I was actually at Eastman, I don't know how much. Also, I know that in Europe there was a great deal going on in the way of master classes, but we'd all heard about Nice and Ron Paul giving all the master classes. They didn't really teach privately at that time. Everything was pretty much in classes, and there were no studio classes over here. So I decided that I was going to do them, and so I was the first one doing it at Eastman. Now
Wow.
it's considered standard everywhere.
Yeah.
But I started, and the reason I started was so my students could have more experience getting up and playing,
Yeah.
and where the pressure wasn't as great, and they could try out things from memory, because we need to do it a bunch of times until we are pretty sure we're going to remember it, right? And so that was a lot. So just talking, thinking about why we're out there, what we want to express, and so on. And this is such a huge topic, but my actor son, I heard him give a seminar. In fact, it was for my summer seminar. It was a few years ago, and he went through Tisch in New York, and he was in the Stella Adler studio, and so the person who was running the class, wasn't even my idea, asked him to give a class in stage presence and being on stage and so on, from an actor's point of view. And so this is first for me. I never heard about it. The mom doesn't hear about anything. So he gave this class, and the title of the class was Truth and Vulnerability. And I just said, "Are you kidding? Did you think that up, Diedrich?" And he said, "No, that's out of Stella Adler acting method." And I said, "That sums up everything we do."
Yeah.
And in order to be vulnerable on stage, it's impossible to give a truly great performance where people are moved. You must know who that person is. You must get to know that person. And if they can't unbear their soul, if you want to put it that way, and truly be who they are, and that involves being vulnerable out there and dare. What you just said a few minutes ago is very profound. We have to dare to do that, and we know that there's a possibility of being rejected that goes with it. So these are things we have to really think about. So and you tell the truth out there, and the truth is about what you truly feel about the music, not about what somebody else said about the music or how someone else plays it, but how do you feel, and then you're going to impart that, and people are then genuinely moved. But I was absolutely blown away by, obviously the actors know all about this. So that's a little bit of, I think those are the things we have to go through. When I'm doing concert, I feel like almost like I'm giving birth, like you're birthing a concert, and we go through lots to do that. And we all worry and agonize about it and everything, and yet we still do it. And my husband used to be hilarious. He was absolutely not a musician. He was a structural engineer, and his specialty was hot concrete. We couldn't have been farther apart. But he really was European, he was Swedish, and he really loved the arts, and was very well educated in the arts. And he used to say to me, I can't imagine doing what you do. What would possess anyone to want to get up there on stage in front of everybody? What would possess somebody to want to do that? I said, I just can't conceive of it. I can't understand people who want to do it, but since you want to do it, I'm going to help you. So I think other people look at us and think, what's wrong with them?
Right.
But there's some way of love-hate relationship with it, right?
Yeah.
So we have to do it. And back to Roger Stevens, he once upon a time said to my parents when we were thinking about music school, he said, you only do this if you have to. He said, don't do it if you don't have to. If you have to, then those are the people who should do this. And maybe there's some truth in that, because you got
Yeah.
to have that kind of passion and motivation.
Do you believe that? Or do you feel like, there's so many different paths that people can take these days in music? There's so many avenues that um I don't know, that you should just pursue where your heart kind of takes you, but if you don't end up in a career in it, that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to say on that topic, but we change. We don't stay the same, and people discover passions as they go along,
Yeah.
things they didn't even know existed, right? I mean, all of us, that happens. College students don't really know that yet, but we know that. And you can find things that, oh my goodness, this is so amazing, and I like to do this. And so absolutely, I completely agree on that. And the people that I work with are multi-gifted.
Yeah.
So they don't only have, sometimes they're amazing writers. There have been visual artists go through. Kate Lem is a very famous photographer
Yeah.
at this point, but she was also a superb flutist. So I mean, I could go on. There are some surgeons and some lawyers, and they're extremely happy. Some of them are actually doing litigation for orchestras. So
Right.
they found
Yeah.
ways to really serve the musical community, and they are very, very happy. So everybody is different, but I think maybe what Roger Stevens said is still true, that if you have it's actually what you said, if you really have something in your heart, then I am a person who wants to go with the glass is half full, not half empty.
Yeah.
I believe you should go for that passion, because there's a reason that's in your heart.
Yeah.
you know you probably have what you need for that. I think.
Well, Bonnie, thanks so much for sharing so much about your life. And it was really fantastic hearing your wild stories. You certainly have quite a lot to share. So just thank you again. It was really a pleasure having you.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure, and this has all been really, really fun to talk to you.
Great. Well, thank you again.
Okay, thanks.